It's because the ink is dried and then I went back through it with the pen. Now sometimes, and not always, you can just go right back over this. I said sometimes, didn't I? There we go. But it depends if it's your lucky day. See, usually what you can do is you can drag the pen this way, but when you go back, you snow plow up the ink. So even in this case, just to make my point, to see if I lied, I probably lied. With no pressure at all down on the ink line. Okay, I'm just letting the pen just hang in my fingers. And it looks like I've got that repaired. So as long as I know I can repair things, and in the worst of all worlds, pull a ruler up, water, Windex, M600, just wipe it clean. That's one of the nice things about ink is, unlike paint, you don't hear wedding bells and you're not married to it until you actually put clear over it. You can always just wipe the whole part off and go right back to ground zero. Now another thing about gloves, I like to wear gloves all the time when I'm doing this just to keep the part clean, but the gloves get dirty too. Every once in a while you have to just throw them away. You really can't clean them. They get full of little contamination of sorts. As soon as I see I'm not getting nice clean lines, I put a new pair of gloves on. Or in the worst of all worlds, I may have to talc a part down. Now when it comes to the place where I want to put the trim tab, it's simple. Just take a little Windex and a Q-tip, and you can take that line right off. I wanted to see this laid out before I decided on what shape and size this trim tab is going to be, because it's an asymmetrical trim tab. So I'm going to cut a piece of tape the size I think it should be. This way I can manipulate it, look at it from several different angles and see if I have the angle that I'm looking for is, okay, you can see it on this side even better. It's got a little bit of an angle going out that way. And this is a parallel line. So let's work off the line. Okay, so now we can trim this. And I know I'm 1.5, I can make the box. And then once I carry the lines around, I'll have that all set up on the other side. I can just reverse cut another piece of tape. Again, it's just the building blocks of how you lay some of these things out and have a drawing to look at and some of the ideas and modify the ideas. It's not a stunt plane. I mean, it's not a scale plane. So if you want to put something a little different or whatever, you know, it's not a deal breaker. Good about this is I can see some of the rivet lines and some of the things that look like rivet lines on the real plane as opposed to lines. So that's good to have in our little arsenal of things to look at. Anyway, I got the trim tab on there. Boy, it certainly makes a world of difference. The ink is really something that just makes it come alive. Now, of course, we'll do the same thing we did on the elevators. Carry the trim tab around, clean the whole part, ink it with matching parallel lines. And then as if that wasn't enough, maybe we'll even finish this one up today. And I'll count that as a pretty good day. Now, after a nice coffee break, I'm ready to get back to this. First part, the only issue I had with the first part, connecting the trim tab in the back, was a little bit antsy. A little tricky. Now I want to make sure I get the trim tab in exactly the same spot, and I want to make sure I have a mirror image, the same amount of lines. I don't want this to end at a different kind of a triangle, since it's this triangle that looks like a good replication of the scale plane. Now another thing, as I did the back side of this, I had to use some talcum powder on it. I didn't show that on the video yet. whenever the lines are not coming out the way you're real happy with them, and when they're not as straight and as even as you can get them, when they start getting little bubbles in them and stuff, re-sand the part, re-M600 it, and if all else fails, just take talcum powder and buff it out with talcum powder. Even if you leave a little bit extra on, nothing bad happens. And that's one of the really good tricks. Again, that was a Frank McMillan trick, and I always want to make sure I thank him for that, because that was one that was worth its weight in gold. Whole part again, and this is what I'm saying is one of the good tricks. I don't like to do this unless I have a problem with the ink, because a lot of times the parts are clean enough that you don't have a problem. Well, but in my case, you're handling things, the bird's walking on it, people are coming over. And the last person to drop this on the floor was my good friend Rich Jacobone, who had to eyeball everything and touch it, and his hands are greasier than mine, and well, that's what happens. Now, when I say I just don't go crazy about getting it all off, I use this almost like I'm buffing a part out, and it seems to work. Again, it's a last resort, but it's something now that I've had an issue with the other flap. The whole tail was clean. The tail was hanging up, but these parts were laying on a table, and I'm assuming little spray dust gets on them, or who knows what. In this cellar, you never know what's coming through those heating vents. Dead mice, chewing gum, aliens. Anyway, that is another one of the good tricks, and you might want to do that right from the beginning if you suspect a problem. The little bit extra that stays on there, I mean, you don't have to worry about wiping it all off. It seems like if there's a little bit left on there, and it doesn't affect the tape at all. But now again, now what I have to do, carefully, very carefully lay out the trim tab first, then lay out all the lines, and then by keeping this piece right in on my work surface, I can go back and forth and make sure all my lines are going to match up. It'll really look funny if one ends at a different spot than another one. For instance, out at the tip, if one ends here or here, well, then you got to go back and relay out the whole part. It's just easier to do it with those tape outlines, and then run the lines right off the tape outlines. Got a little flaps in the middle. We were able to make that very close to what we really think is the scale. And I kind of looked at this view here to get some idea of what the rivet lines and things look like on the fuselage and on the flaps and different things like that. Now see, these drawings aren't exactly accurate, but they're certainly close enough to give you some ideas. And in this case, the complementary thing of having these that have the lines that are pretty close to scale and then nothing in the middle, that kind of mirror images what we're looking to do here. Things I like is the look of the rivets, Zeus fittings or whatever these things are that go around the nose, and they're all over the fuselage. There's a gazillion rivets on this fuselage, so this ought to really be, and the cowls, so it ought to be something we could really play up or improvise on, even around the exhausts. Anyway, that's going to be one of the next features in the next couple days. Now I think the last thing I can do today, or at least just get it started, is pull the rudder over and start looking at what I want to do in terms of the rudder, the fin. Again, I can sleep on some ideas I have then. But boy, Gerald Champ, you've been just great sending me all this information. All these things I've been able to accumulate, they all make for just making this part of the job so much easier, and I think ultimately so much more realistic. Now what I think the first thing I want to do, and probably won't get much more done tonight, I want to lay out the trim tab, and I can almost do this in perfect scale. Lay out the ink for the line, and for what amounts to be the real plane this is a fabric covered surface, so I'll lay out the ribs. But again, it's the same thing. Lay out everything in tape, run some of the lines if you're not happy, wipe it off. You can always start all over again. And for sure, this is going to be all, in fact, I'm not even going to finish this. I'm just going to get to a point with this tonight. Because Karen is just sitting up there waiting to go out for Chinese food. Come back and work on this tomorrow. Now today I spent quite a bit of time laying this out on the full-scale plan, trying to get it as accurate as possible. The one thing that I had to make a compromise on is the scale plane doesn't have as big of a stab, so in essence the rudder gets to be about a 3/8 of an inch thinner, but it still looks in scale, considering how we've had to stretch and pull and twist and everything to get this to look as scale as possible. Now one thing I did like, and I do like, is when, in the case of the line on the front here, where it goes through the white, it turns black, and then it comes back out onto the 5, turns white, turns black. I think that, and same with the ruddering detail. I think that looks, that has a look that I like anyway. Anyway, what I do is every so often I just lay everything down on the floor here to get I want to get that stand-up look of how it looks from the position that most people would see the model in. But a lot of times just having a scale drawing like this just makes it a lot easier. In case of doing a typical, traditional plane, you really have a free hand, but you can still mimic some of the things that are on, in this case it's ribs that would be on a traditional plane, fuselage ink lines. It never hurts to know what a real airplane looks like, even if you're doing a plane that's not in any way a scale model. Here's in today's mail from John Cafaro, and John is coming up with a concept for what looks like it's going to be the British version of the P-51, the early one. Now, notice a couple things here. I just thought, I didn't know it was going to come in the mail today, but it just couldn't come at a better time. Notice he's already got in some of what will be the panel lines and some of the ideas, some of the canopy detailing. So this is really a good idea, is if you don't have a real idea of where you want to have things. And I remember Steve Busso used to make the design of his plane and make these shrunk down plans and then do the ink lines, and then the people that built his plane, you'd have a choice of following his pattern for ink lines. And because he knew a lot about aviation, they were kind of realistic. So now John also sent some other cool stuff. We have a picture in our shop of what amounts to be his latest creation, and we're going to add this to the list. Notice he's got some panel lines on here and the graphics letter sets. Nice cowl. He also sent me some of the things that I'll put in my little library, some of the old magazines. I don't collect magazines, but I always enjoy reading them. Oh man, look at this one. Now see, he knows how the way to my heart, so to speak. And we'll look at all of these. Anyway, but here's the thing I want to show. We've already seen some of these books, but we certainly don't have them all. And what I do, I go down to Barnes & Noble and I look at this World Jet. There's no end to the pictures in these. You could just go crazy. Tsunami. It's very easy to spell, the Red Baron with the Warren Walker paint job. But very easy to get ideas. Now one of the things about these books, especially, now here's an Air Cobra. Look at the panel lines around the doors, around the nose. How does that plane get put together in pieces so that when you come up with your own version of ink lining, it can be at least semi-realistic. Anyway, look at this picture of the Red Baron. Oh, absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. Anyway, I'm glad John is enjoying the videos that we've been sharing with him. He's certainly shared enough stuff with us. Great books, more great books. You never have too many great books, do you? Let me tell you another funny trick. I have that Spitfire bedroom upstairs where I must have 100 of these books. And the thing that I thought in the very beginning was I'd read them once and I'd put them away and I'd never see them again. That's not true. They're a constant source of, especially a rainy or a snowy day or something that you're bored waiting for paint to dry. You just always have a use for them. I do anyway. Now just as an example, look at some of the panel lines. If you were doing a P51, the definitive thing, that line around the root of the wing is always a definitive thing. You can see how Al Raby used to do a very realistic ink lining job. Doing a Bearcat, Walt Russell, eat your heart out here. Look at this. I mean, you never have too many books. Now here's just something just to mention. I wanted to show this. This was and I didn't make it, I didn't plan that this would come in this way, but look how the rivets are on that tail. See how they're just rivet lines crossing? Well, when you're looking for an idea of how to ink a plane, you can't really go wrong if you look at how a real plane is put together. Look at how the fittings around the wing fillet. Another thing, you know, I'm not making a scale model, but there's always little writings and little nose steps and little things you might want to use. Never have too many books. This one, an exceptional good one. I've looked at this one, and by the way, thanks John for loan of all of this stuff. We will obviously return it, but we'll hang on to it for a while. You always have, here, look, you open a page, B25. Tom McLean's making a Marauder. I saw that in Stunt News. Boy, what a paint job if you were doing a Marauder. A26. I mean, how do you... Hard not to like these things. Hard not to like the books. But because this video is really basically on ink lining, I thought one of the things we could concentrate on here, and there's one more book left. When you look at some of these books, now this is just one here that's really good. Now look at the wing, just to get an idea of where those wing panels go on a real Bearcat, for instance. Where does the fuselage break? What kind of detailing is on the cowls? There's, if you were doing, you know, like a Danny Banjock's doing that 30s racer, what do the rivet lines look like? Now, and a lot of times you can make a model look worse if you make the lining look totally ridiculous. Having realistic or having some idea about how a plane would go together. Anyway, all good books. Every one of these is good. John, I want to thank you so much. And we're going to get back to ink lining our... This is turning out to be some labor of love. We have a lot of stuff left to ink. The next thing that I wanted to do, or one of the things I was looking around at all my cockpit photos to get an idea. See, a lot of the detail around a cockpit on a real Tigercat is just rivet lines. And what usually happens with these, they paint over it, but they break right down. Also, a lot of the stuff on a fuselage is not panel lines, it's rivet lines. So I'm going to try to incorporate some of that if I can. But I wanted to look at how many different ways, how many different things I could do around the cockpit to make that realistic. Of course, the Tigercat has a sliding canopy. We can try to simulate that the little mechanism that it slides in, if we have the ability to do that. But we're gonna, just by having photos, documentation, and having some idea about how a real aeroplane would be put together, you can just make it so much more realistic than if you just start gluing on, turning it into a Christmas tree and gluing things on it. Even if it's a Cardinal, or even if it's an Impact, there's no reason you can't make it more realistic. Probably the same amount of work, maybe even less. The first thing I want to do today is I want to just try to get some of the detailing around the canopy, and you can pretty much see, for, you know, at least the way I would look at it, it's pretty bland with no detailing around the canopy. Well, we're going to try to change that. We have the documentation laid out. We're going to try to get some appropriate detailing in there. But if you're doing a model where you don't have to have prototypical detailing, you can pretty much just have a free reign of how to do it. Look at this bird. I'll give him a free reign. Now he's going to eat my eyeglasses. Anyway, the other nice thing about it, if we find something that we're really not happy about, it's real easy to erase it and start all over again. Now, even as I start, the first outline, the most basic outlines, a lot of times when you're working on these curved surfaces, it's easier if you just take 2 pieces of tape and tape the template down to give you that line. If you have a helper, it's really helpful to have an extra set of hands, but it's the worst of all the world to have a helper with greasy hands or big fingernails or something. So always have an extra pair of gloves. That's an easy way to deal with that. Now, once that ink line dries, then I simply can just move the template up into the next line. It's like this. What I do is I tape this in place, get it exactly where I want it, and always let the line go just a little bit longer so I can just scrape out that corner when it's done. When you're going up around a fuselage, it gets difficult if you don't have templates you can bend. What happens with a curved surface, if you have a straight line and you go up around a curved surface, it tends to curve. So you got to constantly watch that you're not making something that's the wrong shape. Now, once these lines dry and you have these little edges to deal with, you can just get the razor to lay flat on there and get nice 90-degree corners. Again, a canopy, without putting a lot of detail around it, it's really kind of a bland thing. No matter what, even if it's on a cardinal, you know, just having a little detail really dresses it up. The difference between a window that's got even the most basic outlines and no details yet, but just the basic outlines, how that can work in your favor, make it a lot more interesting. The handy tools you'll really want to have is, I call it an end cutting. This is the end that's cut off one of the templates. This is the straight edge. It's blocked up with tape. Now what this allows me to do is, you can see this side I have lines, but I can't go around the whole fuselage in one pass. So what it's going to allow me to do this way is, is just get my line in place with the tape, and I can bend it as much as I need to. Once I get it in place, I can just press the tape down. Then I can take this edge, bend it right up to the line. It's connecting the lines that gets really, really difficult in the end. Getting it to look like it's a seamless line. Okay, now once it's dry, just got to give that a second or so to dry. Do the same thing up here by connecting the lines. When you're trying to go around things, and that's what prototypical lines look like, they don't end at a convenient spot. Leave this side a little bit longer than necessary, and I'll just trim it off. Now that's one handy tool you'll want to have, and it allows you to connect lines and allows you to bend a line right around in various places. It can be a little bit difficult because it's a freehand thing and you have to space them pretty much by eye, but there's nothing a little practice can't help you with. Sometimes it pays to set out a piece of tape with the spacing if you have trouble laying out the spacing. Seems like I'm always having one finger too many here. But that even adds a little bit of detail. And you can see little by little we're getting some detailing in there that I think is going to add a lot to it. I think it's certainly, every time you add some detailing, it just gets nicer than the time before. And one of the things that seems to work, you see each one of the templates has a different rivet spacing. So I have a variety of rivet spacings. These are real close. These are a little bit further apart, and otherwhere on the plane they'll be smaller diameter, and they'll be even further apart or closer together. I want to vary it because on a real airplane the rivet spacing isn't always exactly the same. So even that just adds a little bit of authenticity to it. But I always like to just rest it up there, look at the real model and kind of get a feel for if we're going in the right direction. We're not going in the right direction. If we're not, get a clean cloth, wipe it off, and start all over again. Another choice we have of going around the windows to make the simulated rivets. What it does, it leaves a little, let's see if we can get this up close, it leaves a little bit different look. So here you have tightly spaced rivets, widely spaced rivets, and what looks like rivets, little Zeus fitting type of rivets. So it gives us a little variety in the look that we're looking for, where it doesn't look like it all came out of the same pen at the same time. And we can vary the line spacing. I'm using an 80 and a 60 pen, so not all the lines are the same size either. It's amazing how quick it picks up a little detail. Now I want to be careful here not to get it too busy. I can always add a little bit. I don't want to just make it too busy all at once. And I want to put it on the floor, take a look at it from various angles, various positions. Make sure I'm satisfied that I have it before I move on to putting on some of the other ink lines. Now ink lines that go around a convergent curve like this where the curve is getting smaller and smaller, you have to go from the small side. I laid it out with tape, taped the little template I have in place, and again I'll probably have to do this 10 times before I get a line that I'm happy with. But some of these lines, they just define it and they really set it off. The lines that go in this direction, very easy to put on, no problem.